we do talk, we know a lot of people in the industry listen to the show in the music industry, and we like to talk about things going on in the music industry. Unfortunately, a lot of what does go on in the music industry that is particularly fascinating is it often has to do with people suing each other. I had put way back, remember when we did the segment about Don Henley suing someone because Don Henley is very litigious? That segment, I had clipped it and put it up on YouTube. And that is by far the most listened to segment that we've ever done on the show. That still gets views on the YouTube, on our YouTube channel. But what has been happening? So there's a little bit of new information here on this particular subject. The band Limp Bizkit. Mm-hmm. They first got very big in the 90s, and they've had a resurgence, and they do very well when they tour. And they had that song, what was that song, Dad Vibes, maybe a year ago, maybe longer, maybe 2 years ago now, that I really like. It was kind of a comeback single, maybe a year and a half ago. But I was kind of a fan of Limp Bizkit back in the day.
Yeah, me too.
I was in a band called The Jinxed, and was it in The Jinxed or in My Life Crisis? Our singer, Ryan Pope, he would, at one point we were covering the song Break Stuff, and I wasn't a big fan of doing covers in the bands I was in because I felt that our originals were strong enough. We didn't need to do a lot of covers, but the guys talked me into doing Break Stuff. And the breakdown in that song where Fred Durst gets really intense and, really angry, Ryan would turn red. He would get so into it and get so into that part of the song. It was fun. So anyway, part of why this is so fascinating to me is this is not an uncommon tale, what we're going to talk about. If you don't know about this, Limp Bizkit is suing their record label, UMG, Universal Music Group, for $200 million in unpaid royalties. Now, artists having to sue their record label for unpaid royalties is not in and of itself a new story. But for $200 million is pretty staggering, because what has happened is, according to Fred Durst and his representation, Universal Music Group never paid Limp Bizkit anything after selling millions and millions and millions of albums.
But they're claiming that's not true.
UMG, well, of course they are.
UMG says they paid Limp Bizkit $1.03 million in back royalties in August of 2024.
Yes, after
that's after the fact.
Yeah,
See, I read it backwards.
After Fred Durst spoke up and said, "Hey, I think you guys owe us some money." Yeah, so they finally, but Limp Bizkit is alleging they owe them $200 million, or a lower number plus damages, however that works out. Now, unfortunately, this is not an uncommon tale, though. There's a term I learned recently, spaghetti accounting, and it's a way that these big labels, and you even hear stories with smaller labels, independent labels, but hopefully a lot less, because you don't want to hear those stories, because those stories are unpleasant, because especially in a venue like this, we always advocate for artists, but it's not unusual for record labels and other entities within the music industry to use some creative accounting, shall we say, or spaghetti accounting. That's a term that I just learned recently. And I learned that
term for me.
Yeah. Oh, spaghetti accounting?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like spaghetti, but I don't think I'm a fan of spaghetti accounting.
That must be an interesting way of accounting.
Yes.
So wouldn't it get messy?
I think that's the idea.
Oh.
So that way it's hard to figure out where all that money went. I learned that term from, there's a YouTuber that I really like, who we've talked about, Top Music Attorney, and or law tuber. That's another term I learned recently, which is a lawyer who does YouTubing.
What is it?
Law tuber.
Law tuber.
Yes, there's a lot of law tubers. They're lawyers who do.
Why do we have to keep making up new words?
Like the Midas Touch,
What is that?
like the Midas Touch Network, which we're fans of. They're law tubers. So. Yes, there's always new terms. Young people are always coming up with new terms. Anyway, what was the one that I knew? There was a term that I knew that DJ Reckless didn't know, and I was like, how do I know this and you don't? Do you remember what it was?
What it was?
Oh, it was thought, THOT. And I'm not going to say on the air what it means, but I was stunned.
I don't even remember. But this is a bad week for my memory.
I'll tell you off air. But I was stunned that he didn't know what that meant, and I did. But anyway, but it's not a nice term. But and it's not
a good thing if you don't know a nice word.
Yeah, right, exactly.
A non-nice word.
But
UMG at this point is trying to say this whole thing should be thrown out because they're making it up.
Right. Of course.
Limp Bizkit is making this up. That's what they're saying.
Of course. Now, what they also claim, so people who don't know how this works with major labels, when a major label signs you, they give you when they sign you and they're going to release your album, they give you an advance on that album. So say, for example, we'll use nice big round numbers because I'm not good at math. So it makes it easier for me, but it also makes it easier to explain these concepts for people who don't know how this works. So, because I think people outside of the industry have this idea that a record label signs you and they give you tons of money up front, and now you're suddenly a millionaire and you're being flown out to LA and you're put up in the Playboy Mansion or something, and you're surrounded by supermodels all day and everything. I think there was a time when that was the general perception that people had about how this music industry works. And it's not. The money that you're given up front is actually an advance. So say they give you $1 million advance. And again, I'm using big round numbers, but let's say they give you $1 million advance. That's to make your album. So you're going to spend that money. That's not like your money to just put into your bank account and now you're a millionaire and you get to go make your album. But now you're a millionaire because you're about to be famous or you're already becoming famous. It doesn't work that way. So that's actually an advance on your earnings. So they're giving you that money. They're investing that money in you, giving you that money up front for you to go and spend on making your album. Now, what some artists might do in a situation like that, they get that $1 million advance, but they're only going to spend $500,000 making their album. So there are ways to do that. Tom Scholes from Boston famously or infamously did something like that, where the label advanced him something like the label advanced him something like $50,000, and he made the record for $1,500 at home in his home studio or something like that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that does happen. But again, they're not paying you this money to keep. It's an advance. An advance is recouped. So this term recoupment is where people can get tripped up. So they're going to get that money back. And the way they're going to get that money back is you make the album, they release the album, they do all the promotion and everything, but they're going to recoup that money they advanced you. That's not yours to keep. And which means you don't get anything from sales, anything, until that money is completely paid back. So you're not getting a check from the label until all of that advance money has been recouped by the label. So Limp Bizkit, so according to UMG, and again, they've made additional statements now in recent days, but according to UMG, back when this was first filed, their claim was, well, no, we hadn't paid Limp Bizkit anything because they hadn't settled the recoupment yet. Now this is where it really gets nuts. And again, and I have an article in front of me, and I know you have something as well. I have something from Billboard that'll explain this in a little bit more detail. But right now, I'm just speaking extemporaneously about what I know about this so far, because I've been following it pretty closely because I'm fascinated by this kind of thing. So what happened at one point was, so either Fred Durst or representatives of Fred Durst, his management or attorneys, whomever, probably all of them at various points, tried to sign in. It's like, a record label, a big company like UMG, they will create a portal, like, you know how for anything financial, right? You know, whether a bank account or some sort of service, you know, you have a portal that you log into and you can see all your numbers and see what your bank balance is and do all this stuff, right? So the record label gives you as an artist a portal to sign into. But I guess there was one point where Limp Bizkit's, this sounds so, we're talking about this huge, you know, multi-million-dollar company here, right? But they create a portal and they give, and so the artist actually gets, you know, a username and password basically to sign into their portal where they can look at all their stuff. The idea being, you know, you can see what your recoupment balance is, how much is left on your recoupment, what royalties are owed to you. You know, you can compare these numbers. And I guess Limp Bizkit's portal wasn't working correctly or hadn't been updated or something. Just weird stuff. But we're talking about a multi-million-dollar company here, right? UMG is a huge company, but they can't get the little things right to even make it so that Limp Bizkit, as a business entity, can see what's going on with their account. But the suspicion is, well, that's intentional. Of course they make it hard because they're trying to hide things. They're trying to hide things from you. They don't want you to see what the real numbers are. And
the other side of that too that you forget about is that the longer that UMG has the money in their bank account, the more money it's making for them.
Right, and interest.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Insurance companies do the same thing. The longer it takes that they have to pay out, the more money they make.
Yes. Yeah, of course. It's it's a dirty business. So
makes you wonder if there wouldn't be some way to prevent that. Like, could there be some way to protect artists in law that precludes them from being able to hold on to money like that?
Move that mic up a little bit, would you? Here, just so it's I muted.
Not loud enough.
Yeah, there you go.
This is something that we don't normally experience.
There you go. And that $1 million, it was roughly $1 million that they finally paid Limp Bizkit in September of this year, 2024, after they started making noise about, hey, we haven't been paid anything. That they claim that the reason that wasn't paid, it should have been paid, but the reason that wasn't was because of a software error. So because of a software error, that $1 million just sat there and hadn't gone to the band yet. Again, Universal Music Group, this enormous multi-million-dollar company. But, you know, like it's hard. This will all come out in court.
It's a blaming game too.
Yeah.
It's a blaming game because UMG is saying, oh no, this is your management's fault. That your manager wasn't like keeping track of things. It's not us.
Yeah.
Because they're saying that they can show for over a year they were having good communications with this guy Paul, who's in charge of the business manager, and that they were keeping in contact with him. And it's all about them, not, you know. It's interesting how they try to like go, oh, look over here. Your guy wasn't keeping track of things, so never mind us. Like, just look over. It's your guy's fault. He didn't keep track of things.
Right.
So it's not our fault for not paying you.
Right.
You know, that's like so twisted that's what they walk in with, and that's actually considered a possibility. Like, how does that even get entertained?
Yeah.
Oh, your guy wasn't paying attention, so we got away with keeping more money. So, It just seems wrong. Yeah. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but that's pretty much what it sounds like they're trying to indicate with me is we didn't conceal anything. You guys just didn't keep track of it.
Right. This is, and sometimes it's not always necessarily malfeasance. Sometimes somebody just signs a bad deal, or people get in over their heads. They don't understand how this all works. Remember when TLC, this is probably one of the greatest examples. When TLC, you know, that first album, Crazy, Sexy, Cool, was huge. It sold a gazillion copies, right? Well, I think it was triple platinum, but it seems like it was because TLC was everywhere. It seems like the album was I think it sold 3 million. But they were broke with a triple platinum album because of the way the contract was structured and the recoupment. They weren't getting any royalties. And they were very public about it, and they got their deal renegotiated because they were very public about it. Like they were not shy about talking about what was going on, but they're at the Grammys, getting an award for best new album or whatever it was. And they're like,
not getting paid.
And they're like, yeah, we have no money and we've sold 3 million copies of our album and we're broke. And that's one of the most well publicized examples because they were so public about it. Because a lot of times too, you learn about these things later on because at the time that it's happening to an artist, they don't necessarily want to go public about it because they don't want to deal with the embarrassment of it. I kind of got screwed here or whatever. My favorite band, of course, as longtime listeners know, Kiss, they actually sued Polygram. They were on Polygram. This was in the early 80s. Very early 80s. This was like when they were making the transition from makeup to non-makeup, and they sued Polygram for back royalties, and they got a settlement over it. Although it was kind of small, but they did get something from it. But we should look at
the other thing about this though. This isn't just Limp Bizkit, and I didn't even realize this until looking back on the notes now that. There's another organization that apparently owns some of the copyright, the Flawless Records, it's called.
Yeah.
So apparently
that's his imprint, by the way. So
what do you mean his imprint?
So there was this thing, it started happening in the 90s where some artists would, if they were on a label, the label would give the artist, if they were interested in developing other artists, they would give them almost like a sub-label.
Oh.
Which is part of the bigger label, and they would call that an imprint. So Flawless Records was Fred Durst's imprint, and he actually did break a couple of bands on his imprint label.
Well, it's just interesting that you noted they gave Limp Bizkit $1 million. Well, they gave another $2 million to Flawless Records, but we don't really owe you any money. It's made up. They're claiming you've made this up.
Yeah.
But we're dishing out over $3 million more. Oops, sorry. Here's some money. But we didn't really do anything. It's fake.
Spaghetti accounting.
How the heck does that work in law, though? How do you say this is all made up and then you're paying money out the other side? But it's like I'm guilty, but I'm not guilty.
Right. Well, I think probably they would say Flawless Records. I mean, that's a separate account from the Limp Bizkit account. In fact, Flawless Records probably have a separate username and password for their big fancy portal
with 2-factor identification.
Yes, it's probably very up to date.
I'm sure it operates much like insurance portals. It's like, you want to appeal that? Okay, get a pen and paper.
Right.
Let's sit down and write an old-fashioned letter.
Right.
There's nothing electronic about this.
Yeah, send us a certified letter.
Meanwhile, give us your money.
Maybe you'll get your royalties.
You don't even have to put your card in; just scan it. I'll take your money very easily.
Yeah,
but not the other way around.
So this is the update. This is from Billboard.com. UMG hits back at Limp Bizkit's $200 million lawsuit, calls hidden royalty accusations fiction. It says here, UMG is firing back at a lawsuit from Limp Bizkit frontman Fred Durst, claiming the label owes the band more than $200 million, calling the allegations fiction and demanding they be thrown out of court. The blockbuster lawsuit filed last month in LA federal court claimed that Durst had not seen a dime in royalties over the decades and that hundreds of other artists may have been treated similarly under systemic and fraudulent policies. But in UMG's first response, this is UMG's, they're finally responding to this officially after several months, a couple months. In their first response on Friday, attorneys for the label said the lawsuit must be dismissed immediately because it is based on a fallacy. Writers Rollin A. Ransom, an attorney with the law firm Sidley Austin, who represents UMG in the suit, said, quote, "Plaintiff's entire narrative that UMG tried to conceal royalties is a fiction. Plaintiff's complaint fails as a matter of law and should be dismissed with prejudice, unquote. The key problem with Durst's claims, according to UMG's attorneys, it's that documents included in his own lawsuit eviscerate his allegations. They specifically cite emails in which a UMG exec appears to have reached out to get royalties flowing, but was rebuffed by the band's own business manager. Yeah, I remember reading that part too, and that doesn't make sense. Like, why would that even happen? But that's what they're claiming. Now, the company also said in Friday's filing, quote, over a year before plaintiff's discovery of allegedly concealed royalties, UMG affirmatively and unilaterally reached out to Limp Bizkit's representative so that it could begin making royalty payments to the band, and was instead informed by him that all members of Limp Bizkit but one, including plaintiff Durst, had assigned their royalty shares to others and were therefore not entitled to any royalty payments from UMG, unquote.
So it's not that I owe you money. It's that you don't actually have the right to sue me. So even though I owe you money, I'm not going to give it to you.
I don't know.
Almost. I don't know. That's what it feels like. But you were right. There's another notation I just found on Music Business World that it's also involving other artists.
Yeah.
From that Durst did have under Flawless Records.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not just Limp Bizkit. It's other bands' music as well.
Does it mention who? Are there any names?
It doesn't. It doesn't.
I was just curious
it just says other.
Because there's at least one band that he broke big, that had a big hit, and I can't remember who it was now. So in a statement to Billboard on Monday, Durst's lawyers sharply refuted the arguments made in UMG's motion to dismiss the case. Attorney Mark Fabiani said, quote, when someone is caught red-handed, their first response is often to hire very expensive outside law firms who first, as a matter of course, try anything to dismiss the suit when they are in trouble with the facts. In this case, we believe UMG is using a typical formulaic, well-trodden strategy of reaching for any escape route by desperately grasping at technicalities, unquote. Durst and Limp Bizkit sued UMG in October, claiming that the band had, quote, never received any royalties from UMG, unquote, despite its huge success over the years. Quote, the band had still not been paid a single cent by UMG in any royalties until taking action, unquote.
So interestingly, Durst is the sole owner of Flawless Records. Interestingly.
I think I may have, when I was talking about how an imprint works, I may have misspoken. It's not like it's a part of the label, but it's so, because there were a number of artists who did this. This was a thing in the 90s and into the 2000s. Like I think Jay-Z had an imprint and some others. So it's like a separate record label, but the major label that the imprint is associated with handles all the distribution. So even though the imprint kind of is an independent label in a sense, the major label it's associated with does the imprint gets to use the major label's entire distribution pipeline and whatever other promotional resources are available. So that makes sense. And I think Gene Simmons, I mentioned Kiss earlier. Gene Simmons had an imprint label. Actually, before it was even really a thing in the 80s, he had an imprint.
That doesn't surprise me.
I think it was just called Simmons Records. I think it was before imprints were really a thing. But
did he ever break anybody?
No, it didn't last. Yeah. Gene tried a lot of things in the 80s that didn't last. Like he tried producing other artists, and of course he had a short-lived acting career. And
you would think that would have made more money than Lunchboxes, but no.
Oh no! Well,
no.
No. It says here, the claim was something of a stunner. How had one of the biggest bands of its era, which sold millions of records during the music industry's MTV-fueled turn-of-the-century glory days, because remember, we're talking late 90s into the early 2000s, how did they still never have been paid any royalties nearly 3 decades later? According to Durst, the answer was an appalling and unsettling scheme to conceal royalties from artists and keep those profits for itself. He claimed the company essentially kept Limp Bizkit in the red with shady bookkeeping, allowing it to falsely claim the band remained unrecouped, meaning its royalties still had not surpassed the amount the group had been paid in upfront advances. In other words, the advances, because there's an advance for each album, had not been paid back according to them.
But the bulk of the main thrust of the claim was that they sold like 45 million albums and never got a dime of royalty.
Yeah.
Until they filed a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Then they got money, but now they're still saying, no, you made that up.
Well, or until they started making noise about it, because they got that million. UMG finally gave them that million back in September, but the suit was actually filed in October.
No, but the motion to dismiss they filed was November 22nd. So that just happened. UMG just filed a motion to dismiss.
Right. They're just now responding.
But quote unquote, because the complaint is based on a fallacy. How do you say that after you just handed out $3 million? Like, I don't get that. Well, how is that a viable motion after you just handed over $3 million?
Well, but I think they're saying that's all they were owed. You know, the million to Limp Bizkit. That's all.
And then the $2 million to the label.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a separate thing.
The sub label.
Yeah.
It is, but it isn't, because Durst is the sole owner. So technically, he's the dude on both ends. Yeah. Right? He's getting the $3 million. It's just under two different names.
Yeah, it is strange that his imprint label would have more money coming to it than, the band he's in that sold 45 million records.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it just goes to back up everything we've been talking about. Yeah. How these companies really have ripped off artists for a really long time.
Yeah.
I mean, what do artists get? What's an artist get these days if they're streaming? Like less than a quarter of a penny?
Oh, it's barely anything.
Or something like that. Like they have to have a ridiculous number of plays before they can even make enough money to pay for a meal.
Yeah, it's barely anything. Spotify doesn't.
A lot of art. Yeah, there's artists that won't put their stuff on Spotify because it is a big ripoff for them.
Yeah.
They don't get anything out of it. But on the other hand, if everybody's using Spotify and you don't put your music on there, it's a catch-22 for an artist. You want to be heard, but you also want to get paid. It's kind of the part of the point. Yes, sharing music is wonderful, but it's also about getting paid as an artist for everything you bring to the table.
There is this there is a certain truth, though. So another thing people probably don't know who aren't in the industry is that it's really always been the case to some degree that artists don't make that much in simple royalties, in the sense that, like, I remember Meatloaf talking in an interview once about how, like when Bat Out of Hell, which I have no idea at this point how many millions of, I mean, it's probably surpassed 100 million albums sold by now. But I remember early in his career, he was talking about how little money he got, like pennies per unit sold of Bat Out of Hell. But the truth is, the real money for a very long time, the real money has been in touring. You can make a lot of money on tour, a lot more money on tour than actual sales.
As long as you keep touring
of albums, right? Which is why some artists tour so much.
Yep.
For example, when Jerry Garcia died, I remember I was never a big Deadhead, so I didn't even realize this. But when Jerry Garcia died, I was reading about how, because people wondered why did he keep touring so much? Because apparently toward the end of his life, there were people close to him who wanted him to stop because his health was failing. And people wanted him to take a break. They wanted him to stop touring, whether it was with the Grateful Dead or the Jerry Garcia Band. And he just kept going because you sometimes these artists get to a point where they can't afford to stop, because you stop and then the money stops. And if you have an entire organization to pay for, you're not just supporting yourself, but you've got managers and lawyers and you've got
how many jobs there, how many people,
these organizations become bloated, and you might have touring staff who you want to keep on retainer even when you're not touring so that they don't go off and work for somebody else when you're not touring, and then you can't get them back for your tour. So you might be paying them all year round, even when you're not active. So
never thought about it that way.
Yeah. So a lot of artists, they tour so much because it becomes a situation where they cannot afford not to. Like, they can't get off of the road because it ends up costing more to be off the road than on the road.
That makes sense. It certainly does make sense because that's where you're going to make your money.
Yeah.
Not just ticket sales, but merch.
Yeah. And now touring has become more expensive. And so it's kind of become a situation now where it's hard to tour. It's harder to tour. So
look at
now the money's made more with merch than anything.
Look at the guests we had recently. Green Jello.
Yeah.
Right? They're constantly touring.
Yeah.
And not only are they constantly touring, they try to keep their expenses down. Like, they have actual school buses that have beds in them so they can actually sleep on the road. And there's other vans and equipment that goes along so they can keep their costs down. But they're like constantly touring. They might take a small break of maybe a few days or, but you go check them out and they're constantly going all around the country, up to Canada. They're constantly on the move. And, you can imagine it would be hard for them to stop because then the money stops. How do you put gas in the car if you're not touring?
Yeah.
You can't afford to have the money stop. So it's a vicious circle. You have to really love what you're doing. That's for sure. Which obviously those guys do. I mean, if you've never seen Green Jello, when they come back around, you have to see them. They're amazing in person. They're just freaking amazing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so much fun.
Yes.
Like, if you want to go to a show that's joy, go see Green Jello. It's just joy. I know that's how, you can't help but feel good walking away from one of their shows, but they're constantly in motion.
Yep.
And that constant motion comes with a lot of expenses because I'll see, what was it? There was something that went recently. It was like their starter in one of the buses went. So they were fundraising to get the starter repaired because they're in the middle of a tour, Yeah, it's a vicious circle. And these guys, especially nowadays, you're not making the money off of streaming.
Right.
Certainly.
Right.
Now, there is something to be said for physical media. There can be some money these days. Records are coming back. CDs.
Yeah. I mean,
but it's never going to be like it was when we were younger.
No.
Where the only way you got the music was to go find it in a store, in a record store, and bring it home, or sit in front of the radio with your fingers ready on record so you could try to record the song off the radio.
Oh, yeah, I used to do that.
You didn't? Yeah, we all did, right? That was how you got to hear your song, or you had to wait for it to come back around. Now we have instant gratification music through streaming. It's never going to be that again. It's instant gratification. So really, the artists are limited on where they're going to make their money. It really is in those live venues and selling merch at the live venues.
Yep.
And that's really the only way they're going to sustain themselves off their art.
That's why a lot of artists get into podcasting too. Although you see it more with stand-up comics than you do with musicians necessarily. Yeah. But there's, that's the thing. If you're even a tiny bit famous, you can start a YouTube channel and monetize it, get monetized quickly and create content that way. Justin Hawkins is a great example of that from the band The Darkness. He has a very popular podcast called Justin Hawkins Rides Again. And it's really good. It's a lot of fun, and it's also very informative because he delves into a lot of these music industry issues as well. So that's another one I would recommend if you're interested in this stuff. Justin Hawkins Rides Again. But so a lot of people in the industry have had to seek other revenue streams. And
and that really these days, it's in that live concert. It's in moving those bodies into a venue that you're going to make the most money.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And that's harder. It's harder on artists, and it certainly benefits people like UMG.
Yeah.
Obviously. But it just kills me that they pay it all out and then they suddenly, this is made up. How do you do that? I don't know. Is it just me that I find that flabbergasting? it's awful to see what these lengths companies will go to rip off the artists that they're making their money off.